Today I'll be discussing Wicked Problems Need Wicked Leaders. As the title says, I'm not from a Harry Potter novel, but we do require wicked leaders for today's challenging problems and issues that we face. Now, if you've noticed, villains in movies and series all have a PhD. Let's start with Poison Ivy, PhD in botany. Doctor Doom, high-tech technology and robotics. Harley Quinn, one of my favorites, psychiatry. And Dr. Evil, medicine. What do we all have in common? And I have in common with them is that I also have a PhD. Now, superheroes are trying to save the world. Well, however, villains are trying to change it, and that's exactly why I'm a supervillain, and I have the power to change the world. And I'm going to tell you and walk you through how I decided to change the world, rather than trying to save it. So, I used to sit in boardrooms with all these decision makers and discuss stakeholders, stakeholder interests, stakeholder issues. We had mutual interests and mutual issues, and sometimes we had conflicting ones. But never in a decision-making room did I hear about the environment, about flora and fauna. No one invited a bee to a meeting room or a strategy meeting. None of them invited them. On the contrary, what they used to do is that they used to shoo the bee out of the room. Which brings us to why I decided to do a PhD, because I wanted to change the world. But I knew that changing it won't happen individually by myself. I am not an island, and I cannot do it all by myself solely. So I decided to acquire a PhD and start changing the world through a lecture room. I had 40 plus students. I had 40 plus leaders that I can brainwash them for the environment. So I started brainwashing 40 students at a time for the planet, for fauna, and for fauna. And I decided to basically change the way they look at stakeholders. Now, as we know, and we're taught in management schools, we have internal, external, primary, secondary, as you wish. They have different attributes of stakeholder, but not everyone thinks about the environment as a fundamental stakeholder. The way we look at the environment, unfortunately, is that it's a resource that we need to reap, utilize to produce these products and services and create demand on these products and services. No one thought about the environment as a partner in our success. No one introduces them. No one gives them a mic. No one gives them a voice. No one gives them a power in a boardroom. No one asks them, what are your interests and what are issues? So what happened? A crisis that doesn't look like a crisis. And that's actually very true. It's a crisis that doesn't look like a crisis. Food is still served on the table. Water still comes out of the tap. And we still put the lights on and energy is still available. So it really doesn't look like a crisis. I can walk you through and tell you all the reasons why this is important, from the 7 planetary boundaries that are being breached, for the social boundaries that are being breached, from the Paris Agreement to the Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we are basically showing we're falling short of attaining and working together to attain them for a better vision and a better future, not just for the present generation, but for future generations. So, this leads us to the wicked part of it. What is so wicked? It's not just hard, it's just a new type of hard. So, it's complex, interconnected, and local, unsolvable problems that combine global and local issues. So, let's unpack it one by one. We're looking at complex, so many causes, but no one solution fits all. So there's not one lever that basically we can pull and resolve this issue at all. Interconnected. This is where we end up with shifting the burden between different aspects of the economy, of the environment, and society as well. Unsolvable, there is no clear solution at all, and it's not a solution that you can find in the back of your textbook. And every solution carries a trade-off, and this is where wicked problems come in place. So, climate, we still require renewable energy for our batteries, and batteries are still required for mining, which is detrimental for the environment. Water, a reality that Jordan is very familiar with, and a crisis, as we are top 5 countries that suffer from water scarcity. Leadership, the type of leaders that we're producing into the workforce these days and sending off to different industries and sectors are leaders that basically value optimization, efficiency, and effectiveness, and are not very comfortable with the trade-off with water, or we're looking at society or the GDP in terms of economy. They're not very familiar with those concepts. So we might be building leaders that are not countering in their decision making, the fairness, the equity, the responsibility, and accountability. So, and this brings us to my best friend, the bee. The bee is one of the most important species. And now, why did I gather you all here today to discuss the bee? The bee is very important because we account for it. It's the smallest animal that basically circles the entire economy that we're looking at. 1 out of 3 of everything that we eat, or that we drink, or that we utilize comes from the bee. The bee moves an economy all by itself. I can talk about 75% of how pollinating animals basically produce food, crops, and moves the agriculture sector. 85% of what we produce and what we utilize and use and wear are basically because of bees and because of the circular economy, which is cradle to cradle rather than cradle to grave. And this very small, insignificant stakeholder is never invited to a boardroom. No one basically pulls a chair and says, what are your problems and what are your issues? And if they are extinct, then our entire economy is at a halt. Just this little friend of mine here. So, as I've mentioned, the bee has never been invited to a strategy meeting, but nor has the river, the soil, or the air at all. So, how do we invite them to a boardroom? And when do they have a say? When can they actually sue us? When they have power, when they have legitimacy, and when they have urgency, as well as proximity. So what sort of power are we talking about? I'm sure many of you have heard of that. Whether they have coercive power, which is basically power to penalize and reward, or whether they have normative power based on norms and values, or if they have mimetic power, which basically entails benchmarking. Legitimacy is something it can obtain from international organizations, NGOs, the government, or activists. And urgency, well, that's also quite familiar nowadays, especially with tsunamis, earthquakes, famine, and droughts. That's basically the environment trying to tell us, wake up and try to change the way we operate. Business as usual is not working, all right? And proximity. How much of our infrastructure do we surround and include the environment in our workspaces, in our campuses, in our offices? Do we bring it in, or do we actually introduce plastic instead to imitate it? And this is where some of the proximity that we need to look at is the Jordan River, Yarmouk River, Zarqa River, as well as Wadi al-Hassa River. How approximately, how are we taking care of our natural resources? How are they becoming a partner of our success, and we're sustaining it for present and future generations? So, going back to where managers are, we are trained to optimize efficiency and effectiveness. However, leaders cannot sit with uncertainty and trade-offs. So, what did I decide to do instead? I decided to introduce sustainability champions. Sustainability champions do not just greenwash or utilize the 3 R's, which is reuse, recycle, and reduce. Rather, they think differently. But how do they think? What do they think about? They think about how to include different partners, how to include different stakeholders that are marginalized, peripheral, powerless, and perhaps voiceless. They don't have a voice similar to our voice, where they have numerical statistical data to spit out, or they don't have descriptive words to tell us how their interests and their needs need to be met. Rather, they use their own language, a natural language to ourselves. So that's rewiring the planet. So how are we rewiring our leadership to meet those trade-offs, to feel secure? So if we're providing an example of water, how is water being utilized sustainably to sustain not just the economic GDP of a country, but also how much of the water is left for domestic use, as well as the environment, which entails flora and fauna. There's always a trade-off that we need to look at, and living with that uncertainty needs to be a new normal and familiar to us all. So, the change that we actually need is real. What do I mean by real? That means it's not greenwashing or framing, not at all. It has to be sustainable. That means it's just not looking at the present, it's also looking at future leaders and future needs of generations that are yet to come. And transformational, not just incremental and small steps of impact, but it has to be transformational. It has to transform the way we operate, change the way we see business as usual. So, the planet does not require a villain with a PhD. It needs leaders with real, sustainable, and transformational visions. So, that's my superpower, and that's how I decided to utilize it. What about your superpower? And I'll leave you with these questions. How are you planning to utilize your superpower? Thank you very much.